I love this bench, but I don't love the way we use this bench. It deserves better, and we deserve better. I'm sorry, bench. It's not you. It's me. So this bench sits right where you walk into our living room, just past the entry. It's kind of turned into our dumping grounds. We walk in, we set our stuff on it, backpacks, purses, laptops, we throw shoes under it. On top of that, we don't really have a good place to set our mail or charge our phones. We usually end up doing that on our kitchen counter. I really do love this bench. I'm sure some of you recognize it. It's a Nelson platform bench produced by Herman Miller. I remember reading once that Nelson originally designed it for his office, and that the reason it's slatted instead of a solid surface is because he didn't want people stopping in his office and getting too comfortable. I've sat on it a few times. Mission accomplished, Mr. Nelson. I was lucky enough to find this one being thrown away by a library. It's an actual Herman Miller piece, not a knockoff. It was pretty beat up when I found it, so I had to do a little work on the legs, but it was well worth the 2 or 3 hours I spent on it. I figured I could build something here that could address all of our issues. The only real limitation is size. I don't want something that is going to stick out too far. We want to keep it nice and open for traffic. Also, I don't want to build something with just function in mind. Basically, aesthetics are my number 1 priority, and utility is my number 2 priority. I came up with a few ideas before settling on this one. This one doesn't really address the backpack coat hanging issue, but I'll take it one piece at a time and focus on this guy for now. For this build, I'm going to use 2 types of wood, walnut for the frame and maple for the cabinet and shelves. The cabinet and shelves will be made from maple plywood with hardwood edging to cover up the plywood lines. I've actually never used maple plywood before, but I can't imagine it's much different than any other type of plywood. I started off by breaking the plywood down into roughly the size of the finished pieces. When I break down full sheets, I use my track saw because it would be way too hard and dangerous to try to balance them on my table saw. I was able to get everything out of just 1 sheet of plywood. The project got off to a kind of shaky start when I cut the pieces about 1 inch narrower than I had initially intended. I was upset for about a minute, but then I remembered the narrower the thing is, the better it's going to be for traffic. So I chalked it up to a blessing in disguise and moved on. In general, I try to keep myself organized while I'm building. There's just something about working in a clean space that makes me happier. So every once in a while, when things start getting out of hand, I kind of hit the reset button. After I was done organizing myself, I cut a bunch of strips of hardwood to edge the plywood. I cut these about 1/4 inch thick and then glued them on. I leave the strips a little proud so that I can trim them flush after everything is dried. The cabinet's made of 6 pieces, a top, bottom, 2 sides, a back, and a vertical partition. I started off by cutting miters along all of the edges of the carcass pieces. This is just your basic 45-degree angle so that I end up with a rectangular cabinet. The reason I'm doing this is so that it hides the ply lines where the edges are glued together. The cabinet is about 54 inches long, which is more than my table saw can handle, so I cut the miters on the long pieces using a track saw. With the pieces cut to final dimension, I cut a bit of joinery before gluing up. First a rabbet along the back of all the pieces to inset the back panel. And next a pair of thin grooves that will hold some sliding doors. The only real trick here is cutting the grooves for the doors on the top piece deeper than the grooves on the bottom piece. This way you'll be able to insert the door by sliding it up to the top and clearing the bottom. Because I'm cutting 2 of them, I need to go back and forth cutting the front one and the back one. I did exactly 1 rotation for raising and lowering my blade. It doesn't need to be dead on accurate, just about the same. Next I'm going to put a dado in the top and bottom pieces to hold the vertical partition. This will help keep the box a little bit more rigid. First I found and marked out my cut on the center of each panel. Then I made the cut using a router. The reason I'm using a router instead of a dado blade is because I don't want the cut to go all the way through. The router leaves a rounded edge, but I'll square it off using a chisel. Then I assembled everything. The miters are reinforced with dominoes, which also make the glue up way easier. It would probably be stronger to do a butt joint that was reinforced here, but the miters look better in my opinion, and they're going to be plenty strong. If this were a box people would be standing and jumping on, say a bed, then I might worry, but it's not, so I'm not. Next, I finalized the size of the vertical partition and glued it in. I somehow forgot to film myself doing this, but here I'm doing something more important, prepping for the piece. A little trick I learned after making a few boxes out of plywood is that while plywood is usually pretty flat, when you're using long pieces, it often bows slightly one way. I always make my boxes so that the concave side is on the outside and the convex side is on the inside. Basically, it bends inwards. This way, when I put the vertical partition in, it holds the piece perfectly flat, eliminating the bow. Here what you're watching me do is make a wedge piece that is cut to the exact size of the inside of the carcass on the ends. Then I wedge this in the center while I make the vertical partition. Hope that makes sense. Now with the cabinet complete, I cut and attached the back panel. I actually used 2 pieces for the back panel because I didn't have one piece that was long enough. You can't tell from the front though. A, because there will be doors, and B, because they meet behind the vertical partition. Finally, I cut my doors. These are coming from 1/4-inch maple plywood. I'm not going to put any handles on them, just a little negative space for a finger grab. Now you can see how the doors go in and out. With the box and shelves out of the way, I turned my attention to the walnut frame. I started by figuring out how much wood I needed to use in order to get all of my pieces. Then I milled everything to about 1 inch thick and cut all of my pieces into blanks. I don't think that's the right term, but basically I mean a piece of wood that is roughly the finished size and has all 90-degree corners. Every time you see me using the miter gauge in this project, I'm either cutting something at 0 degrees to make a 90-degree corner or at 8 degrees. That's the angle of the vertical pieces, in quotation marks, because they form an 82-degree angle with the ground. The first piece I'm working on here is the tops and bottoms of the 2 sides, the little short pieces with the tapers that kind of look like the wings on the side of the Flash's helmet. I marked out all of my angles, then I made the tapered cut on my bandsaw and cleaned it up on the sander. Next, I marked and cut out the aforementioned 82-degree vertical pieces. With those 6 pieces cut, 2 tops, 2 bottoms, and 2 verticals, I started to lay out the joinery. I'm going to use half laps to join all of these together. When I make this type of joinery, I make all of my marks by actually putting the pieces together and drawing lines where I'm going to need to cut. I could figure out the angles, but I don't even bother. Then at my table saw, I just line up the marks to my miter slot and lock the miter gauge down so that I know my lines and the blade are parallel. I also always make sure to put an X on the face that I'm going to cut since it's confusing with a lot of mirrored pieces. Next, I marked out all of the dados for the vertical pieces. Each will have 3. 1 for each of the shelves and another really big one to hold the cabinet. Then it was back to Dado City. For this piece I took a sort of build as I assemble approach towards the end. Basically the piece can stand with just 2 legs, the cabinet and the shelves. It would just be a little wobbly, and the shelves would be more likely to sag in the middle since there wouldn't be anything to support them. To fix these problems there's a whole back structure, but I thought it would be easier to actually assemble everything and then build the back structure around the piece. It actually wasn't that easy, so I might have been wrong to do this. Who knows? In any case, at this point I glued up the legs and attached the cabinet and the 2 shelves. The cabinet is glued and screwed in. You can't see the screws unless you open the doors and look for them, so I'm fine with that. And the shelves are just glued in. From there I was able to stand the entire unit up so that I could take measurements for and cut the long pieces that run horizontally along the top and bottom of the back of the unit. And from there I could make the vertical piece that runs up the back center to kind of tie everything together and keep the shelves from sagging. Once I glued this piece in, the entire unit went from wobbly to solid. Then it was on to the detail work. You gotta be careful. Nelson is quoted as having rhetorically asked, "What is the crowning glory of your civilization?" The symbol is clear a statement as the pyramids, the Parthenon, the cathedrals, and his answer was junk. Junk is the rusty, lovely, brilliant symbol of the dying years of your time. Junk is your ultimate landscape. I don't know that our junk is the crowning glory of our civilization, but it might be the most honest portrayal of it. Nobody stages junk, it just builds. Over years of living, curiosities discovered and abandoned, their remains are junk. Maybe Nelson had a different meaning when he spoke of junk, something less literal than I'm imagining. In any case, he was a brilliant designer and something for people like me to aspire to. And at the end of the day, if you think anything that I'm saying, this video, this project, any of this is junk, then I thank you. Hey guys, thanks for watching the build video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Since you stuck around, I feel like I can kind of assume one of two things. Either A, you did really enjoy it, or B, you just have this unquenchable hatred for me and you're just watching this and just freaking steaming right now. So hopefully the former is true, and assuming that it is, I have a simple favor to ask of you. First, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, which is right about here. And if you've already done that, maybe you go ahead and hit the like button, which is right there. And finally, and this part is in all seriousness, if you are enjoying these videos, what I would ask of you is to tell somebody about it. Right now I'm not making any money off the channel, and maybe that'll change someday in the future. But what I'm really focusing on right now is growing the channel, and I need your help to do that. Right now I kind of view my currency as my subscribers. When I see that count go up, that's what really motivates me and keeps me going. I get a lot of messages from people saying that a friend turned them onto the channel or whatever, and that really is my favorite thing to hear. I just love when I hear that because it means that you guys are liking it and you're recommending it to your friends. And I just appreciate it so much when you do that. And I would encourage you to keep doing that. Everybody just think of that person in their life. Maybe it's a friend that likes woodworking, or somebody that's into design or graphic design, or just kind of an artsy person. Everybody has that person in your life. And what I would encourage you to do is tell that person, tell them about the channel, and let them decide for themselves. Maybe they'll be into it, maybe they won't. We can't really control that, but we can control at least getting it in front of them that one time. So please, I beg of you to please do that and help this thing keep growing. I want to keep it growing and see where it goes and see what it can turn into. And that's really it. It's not going to be hard on your part. It'll take a couple minutes, but I would really appreciate it so much. So thank you for doing that for me. And I'll keep making these videos. I'll keep putting the time in and coming up with new ideas. And I hope that you guys will continue to support me in the way that you have so far. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.